Hello, everyone. As Nigel was mentioning, I've had a lot of different hats at Puppet. I've had the privilege of seeing all the different parts of the product delivery process. Everything from the building it, to deploying it, to monitoring it, to doing professional services, all the way into even marketing. And so I've had a really, I suppose, unique experience in seeing how all of this comes together and how all of these parts need to fit together and work together to deliver value to customers. So today, I want to start off talking about product and engineering dysfunction, and then talk about empathy, and why how you feel about your coworkers and how you all work together really, really matters. And then how to build a culture of continuous improvement, and finally talk about continuous delivery, how that fits into a cloud-native world. In the modern world, we talk a lot about web scale, fault tolerance, planet scale, right? But the thing is that if you have all of that speed and velocity, but it's dysfunctional, well, that's still dysfunction, right? Are you actually getting benefit from all of this technology if all you're shipping to your customers is your internal dysfunction? For example, as a product manager, I've certainly heard and even said some of these things where I might, the engineers might say, we need more detailed requirements. I might say all engineering cares about is tech debt, in a moment of frustration, perhaps. And there ends up being this animosity at times, and not intentional. Nobody intends for there to be animosity. Nobody intends for there to be friction. But it's easy when you are on different sides of a topic and on different sides and have different requirements and different goals to have this kind of animosity come out. A lot of you are probably more familiar with perhaps some of these, where engineering and operations might have this kind of animosity where the engineers might say ops won't let us use the latest Ruby for whatever reason, and operations might say developers don't know anything about logging or how to scale their application and things like that. The theory goes, and then that's where really DevOps comes about. And DevOps for me is about caring. That's really what it comes down to. Caring about your job, caring about your work, caring about your coworkers, caring about your place in the business, and caring ultimately about your customers. The theory goes that the cause of this animosity that I was talking about is that there's silos, like I was talking about. You're on different sides of something. You have different goals. And so the theory is that empathy, it rarely extends beyond our line of sight because we're humans, right? We need to see the people that we work with. We need to see what our effects on another team are in order to be able to develop that kind of empathy. So let's put them together, right? Just dev, ops, put them together, got DevOps, all right, end of talk. Well, reality is far more complicated than that, right? Really what you have is a full product delivery process. And on the left side, you've got product management, which is what I'm doing now. We're talking about problem statement and problem prioritization, and that's where you start to involve engineering more and get into the design and development and then deployment, where operations starts to come in, ongoing monitoring so you can understand how the application is performing and how the customer is using it and the value that they're getting from it. Well, where in here does DevOps actually fit? Like, where's that line that we can say, there it is, that's the DevOps? I don't think that really exists. And I think that when we talk about DevOps, we really just need to talk about how we talk across any of these lines, any of these boundaries, and have that human element to it. Shared goals with transparency and accountability are how we build a shared sense of purpose. And that shared sense of purpose is how you break down those silos to get to the point of being able to have that line of sight so that you know how your work affects other people and you can start to develop that sense of empathy. So we did a lot of research around this. The State of DevOps report, we've done this for several years now, and we have learned a lot about how teams work together and where success happens and how to scale that success. This year, we really learned a lot about people's and organizations' journey to adopting DevOps and where they actually see that success and where DevOps really starts to grow within an organization. Yasmin talked about this earlier in her talk, and she really talked about the 5 stages that companies go through. That's something that really started to show in this year's report. So I definitely recommend that you go read this. One of the things we learned about it, though, is that you need to start with practices that are closest to production. And at first, this kind of surprised me a little bit because I've always been under the mindset that what you really need to do is measure your entire process and just find your biggest bottleneck and where your biggest problems are and focus on that. But what we've learned on this year's report specifically is that when it comes to starting a place that is that you can get the most success and the quickest wins, starting closest to production is where you can do that because the teams tend to be right next to each other. Right? They're closer together. They may be siloed. They may report to different directors. They may be in different parts of the org chart, but functionally, they hand off to each other more closely. So it's easier to start with that part of the delivery process in order to get that really quick win and be able to show other organizations how that success has resulted in better process and better delivery for your customers. Cross-team sharing is absolutely key to all of this. If you do have a success, if you have two teams that were not working well together and you get them working well together, being able to show other teams and share your successes and how you accomplish that is absolutely key. However, what we learn is that you're not doing this. A lot of the teams that we spoke to are doing this internally. Right? So they share among their own team, and that makes sense, right? Because you have that line of sight. You have that empathy. And so you want to help the people that you're caring about in order to have the same success as you. But are you talking to the teams that's 10 phases away in the product delivery process? Are you talking to the procurement department in your organization? Well, probably not. Why would you? Right? There's not that line of empathy, and so there's less desire and less motivation to be able to share that success across other organizations. However, when you do, that's where you get the biggest success as a company. Your customers win more. Another thing that really showed in this year's report, and I know that I've seen this personally in talking to customers, is that executives in a company tend to have a far rosier view of DevOps and its success in their organizations than the people on the ground. And I think this really comes down to the fact that executives have a shorter surface area. If they need to collaborate with another executive, they go over to their office and they speak to them. If they need to have something happen within their own department, they talk to their directors. They get quick feedback. They make sure it happens. But imagine if you are the individual contributor at the bottom of that ladder, and you need to talk to somebody on the team next to you. Well, now you have to go up the management chain, over, back down, or you try and reach out and have your hand slapped if you're breaking process, if there is such a thing. I hope not. Or you just hit a wall. Right? You have different priorities, and the other person doesn't have time to help you out. And so I think it's very, very important for not only for individual contributors to make sure that the reality on the ground is being fed up to the chain, but also that the executives in your organization listen to that feedback loop and help reinforce that feedback loop so that they are aware of what the challenges you all are facing on the ground really are. And how we need to do that is by building a culture of experimentation. One of the things that is absolutely critical to successful DevOps in any sense of the term is to get to the point where you can have a culture where you are free to experiment, where you can try something out freely, measure its success, be able to communicate that success to other teams, and if it was a success, be able to codify it in a shareable way. But I think that it's absolutely critical that you don't just focus on a culture of experimentation in, say, IT development or IT operations. It needs to be from the entire focused view from the business definition all the way to the customer's hands. And I'll be able to have feedback loops all along the way. Let's do an example. So I, as a product manager, I build a product requirements doc. It's beautiful, of course. And I want to ship this fluffy cloud to my customers. So I spend a lot of time. I get the document absolutely perfect, and I hand it off to engineering. And they break it down into the components, and they put it into containers. And then they deliver that using a multi-cloud, fault-tolerant, planet-scale Kubernetes, and all is well, right? Well, what happens when the customer doesn't quite see the cloud the way that I was anticipating? Well, now we have a problem. And we have a problem for a number of reasons. One, the customer is not getting the value that we had hoped. Two, sales and marketing is out there selling it as if it's made of gold. I can say this. I used to be in marketing. Thank you, Tim, for all of your work. Tim is our VP of marketing. Now, this is an exceptional problem if we spent 4 months building the thing, only took an hour to deploy it, but then it took 3 months for me to learn that the customer isn't happy with our solution. Now your friendly neighborhood product manager is not so friendly anymore. I'm so glad Yasmin bought this flamethrower, by the way. All right, so what I think what it really comes down to is that great tools and processes are absolutely required. You should be using Kubernetes. You should be looking into containers. You should be automating with Puppet. But it is grossly insufficient. If you can't take advantage of the tools from a cultural perspective, then does it really matter? Who cares if you can ship in an hour if it takes you months to build it and ship it in the first place, and it takes you months more to learn that the customer didn't really like what you shipped? Let's take another example. Let's say instead I said, you know, I'm pretty sure that the customers want clouds. Like this cloud thing is real, right? So let's give them a cloud. But instead of doing a full defined product, I said, hey, you know, let's just kind of do an outline and see what customers, how they react to it. Let's go in with some measurements. I expect that the customer is going to use it this way. And let's ship that out and measure it and instantly get feedback so that we only spend 2 weeks building it, an hour deploying it, and 1 week measuring feedback against the KPIs that we defined up front. All right, so we shipped it, and the customer didn't quite interact with it the way I was hoping, but hey, let's try another experiment. We tried one thing, let's just try another. And so I give it a little bit more requirements. I put a face on, I give it a little bit more definition, say, you know what, if this is what you're wanting, let's just roll with it. Let's just see if this works. I'll make what you're seeing even better. And again, we spend 2 weeks building it, we ship it in an hour, and then it turns out, oh, the customer was trying to get it to ice cream. They wanted the ice cream emoji. All right, now we know. And we only took a fraction of the time to be able to learn this. This is where quick processes and technology is absolutely critical to enable these kinds of workflows, where I as a product manager and your business as a business can say, let's do an experiment. And we know that we can do this safely. We know that I can do this experiment in just a few weeks or even just a few days, instead of having to wait months before we get into customers' hands and months more before we learn from it. Now I can start to take liberties, and I can start to do innovation that I previously couldn't do before, where now I can take more risks, whereas previously I would be more conservative. That's where continuous delivery really comes in. That's what you just saw an example of. For me, continuous delivery is all about building a culture of continuous learning. Now, a lot of you, I've spoken with you and you've said, you know, we're not ready for continuous delivery because we don't want every single commit being deployed to customers as soon as possible. That's not what it's about. What continuous delivery is really about is proving that every change is deployable at any moment. So at any moment, you as a business can make that call to ship it to customers, and you know that you can. You know that it's not going to be an all-weekend process. You know that it's just going to be an effortless thing. You push a button, it's in customers' hands. And again, that lack of friction, that lack of mental challenge means that you're going to actually do it, and you're going to be able to take more risks. The goals of continuous delivery are to automate away risk and drudgery, to measure that system as a whole. And I think that a lot of people miss this. A lot of people just look at it as engineering to deployment. But really, the continuous delivery gives you the opportunity to look at your entire delivery process as a whole and measure the system from end to end and improve everyone's line of sight into all the other teams that go into the delivery process. And even, finally, to develop a culture of continuous improvement and experimentation, as I've been talking about. So how does that relate to continuous integration? Now, continuous integration is super important. You all should be doing it if you're not. And I imagine at this point you all are. But continuous integration is a local optimization. It makes your development teams better. It doesn't make your business better, because it does nothing to optimize that end-to-end workflow. It just removes one of the bottlenecks. Continuous delivery is that business optimization. It's the thing that makes the business better at delivering value to customers. In order to do this, this is my process. I'd love to hear your feedback on it, but the most success that I've seen from people is first, codify your existing product delivery process from end to end. It doesn't have to be fully automated. Just write it down. Understand exactly what steps happen where in order to go from problem definition to customer's hands. Have clear inputs and outputs for each of those stages. Note that that doesn't mean that each stage has to be automated. Don't get me wrong, automation is really important. You should absolutely work towards it. But it's okay to have manual steps. What's important is to be able to define those steps with clear inputs and clear outputs. And then you can measure each phase independently and be able to identify the bottlenecks in your delivery process. Where do your delivery fail? Where does it fail? Is it in deployment? Is it in development? Is the problem more around with docs? Like where is it in your process that is your biggest problem? And then take that biggest problem and just work on that. Make it as efficient as possible until it's no longer the biggest problem, then move on to the next one. And once you get good at that, you can start to build that culture and that practice of continuously improving. So as I mentioned, automation is absolutely important. You should absolutely try to automate as much as you can, but it's not a prerequisite. I don't want people to look at continuous delivery and say, well, we have to automate absolutely everything before we can start to do continuous delivery. Not true. Excuse me. It's important that you understand that the thing with continuous delivery is to just simply define that process, even if some of the steps are manual, and be able to measure it and continuously improve it from there. So let's see some of this in action. Sorry, let me switch over here. So we have a number of products that I want to talk to you about today. One is Puppet pipelines for containers. The other one is going to be Puppet Container Registry, and I'm going to give you a sneak peek at a product that we've been working on for a while now called Helm Chart Registry. Puppet pipelines for containers is a way of defining your application and all of the microservices that go into that application and be able to deploy it very rapidly to any Kubernetes cluster. And what you heard recently, or what you saw this morning and heard from the announcements today, is that we now support Helm. And I'll show that to you. So within the application, this is the Forge application, and we have two containers that make up this app. Each are independent microservices that can be delivered independently. So we see all of the events that happen within our project. So we can see, image pushes, builds. We see PRs that have come in, builds that have failed that we need to go look at. And if we go over to our pipeline, we can see that we have two pipelines within this project. One for the API and one for the dev, and I can switch between them all day long. Now in this one, this is a fairly simple pipeline. It can get very complex very quickly, but for this one, we're starting out with the build phase and say once the developers actually build something and build a piece of value that we want to deliver to customers, this is where we're going to actually build it up, store it in Puppet Container Registry, which I'll show you in a minute, and finally be able to build the Helm chart that will deploy that application to Kubernetes. Now, because this application is both containerized and packaged with Helm, I can deploy this to any Kubernetes cluster I want. So if I want to do one that's just for development, no problem. Want to do it to production? Can do that too. The repeatability is what's important. This allows me to be able to trust that if we do a build and a deploy into a staging environment, and we agree that the acceptance criteria has been met, that we know we can push a button or automate that button to deliver that value to our customers and start measuring it. And in this case, once we actually do a successful build, we're going to go ahead and automatically deploy it. Over here, we have our Helm chart capability. Now, this is a new capability, but it's already pretty powerful. So here we can see that we have a Helm chart for each of our microservices that make up the Forge application. And we can do a local build of it and be able to push a button to deploy any of them at any time. We can do this manually if we want, or of course, we can do it from the pipeline as you saw. All we have to do is push this button, select the cluster that we want, select the namespace that we want. I'm going to go to default. And then select the tiller we want to interact with, and finally the version we want to deploy. And then once we hit deploy, boom, it's out. And we can watch once it actually gets the data going, we can refresh this and see the deploy happen live. And actually, I think that one's going to take a little bit to get going. So we might come back to that one. But we can also manage things like Kubernetes secrets. We can manage the services. We can manage pod scaling. We can even manage notifications so that we can have full visibility when the actions are taking place in our delivery process. So we can get email notifications, Slack, HipChat, whatever it is you use, we can probably support it. Now, once we do a build, we can ship things. Oh, I think I ruined the end of that demo. Once I do a build of our containers, we can deliver that to the Puppet container registry. Now, this is our internal application for storing containers, obviously. But as you're probably thinking, what's so special about a container registry? There's lots of those, right? Well, we have this really handy pipelines feature. And what happens here is I can have this image, this Lumagon image, pushed to our local repository in the application as often as I want. And then when I'm ready, I can do a promotion to push it to all of my other public registries. So I can push it to Docker Hub. I can push it to Google's registry, Amazon's registry, Azure's registry, whatever it is you have. And I can even automate that. So whenever I do a push to my local repository, I can have that image synced out to all of the different public cloud vendors that I'm using in order to deliver my application. So my image is always closest to where the application is actually going to be deployed. I think that's pretty handy. The final thing I wanted to show you is the Helm chart registry. Now, this is an application that we have built recently, and it's all around sharing. You'll hear me talk about sharing all the time because I think it's absolutely critical. And that's why we started building this application. We started talking to teams, and everybody's like, Helm is becoming the de facto way of deploying to Kubernetes. But it's kind of hard for us to be able to package an application up, say a planet scale MySQL implementation or a Redis database or message queue. And we want to be able to package it up in a standard way so that our development teams can consume that middleware and be able to incorporate it as a dependency into their application or simply deploy it out and try it out for development. Well, how do you help the development teams understand what is available to them? That's why we built this. So with here, I can have a list of all of the different applications that I want to be able to deploy, including, you can see we have our Forge API and Forge Web. If we go into one of these charts, it's funny, I made sure I was logged in right before I got on stage, but demos. There we go. So if you see here, we can dive in and understand not only how to add the repository to our local Helm installation, but we can also get our install command to be able to very quickly deploy this into any cluster that we have. From here, you can also get more detailed information. So the README from the chart is rendered here into the application. I can even go in and see the home page for this application so that we can have an internal, say, like a Confluence page or whatever for that application if we need more information. You can also be able to browse previous versions. So I can go back and to this version of, in this case, AquaSox, and be able to deploy this to any cluster. Now, this is really handy for applications, your internal applications as well. For example, this means that I, as maybe a support engineer, could go into here and say, you know what, a customer's having a problem with this previous version of our build. Let's go replicate that environment. Well, now I can just go into this application, go find the version that they're using, grab this Helm install command, throw it up on the support team's cluster, and I've now replicated my customer's environment. At least, maybe not perfectly, but pretty close. Even better, if you come back to the Helm chart integration within Puppet Pipelines for Containers, we can even be able to integrate with that Helm chart repository. So I can take any version of any of these charts, click the launch button, and go through the exact same deployment that you saw me do earlier. Oh, that one doesn't have any tilers. And let's just do 0.1.2. There we go. And then deploy. And away we go. All right. So that is what I wanted to show you. If you have any questions about it, please let me know. Let's head back over to here. All right. So with that, you can go to this URL here to sign up for a private beta for the Helm chart registry. This is something that we think that people are going to have a lot of interest in, and we'd love to hear from you. We're not going to make the beta publicly available just yet because we want to learn more about your use cases and how we can use that to better improve the product for future customers. You can also learn more about Puppet pipelines at puppet.com. I really suggest that you do. This is something that we are really going to invest in very heavily. We think that we know that the value of this is very important to a lot of you as you go down this journey of continuous delivery and you adopt these cloud-native, Kubernetes container-based workflows. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.